Hi, everyone. I'm Tova. I'm an account manager here with Rezgo, so I'm really excited to be hosting this webinar today. We have a special guest, Stephen Joyce. He is a seasoned technology entrepreneur currently serving as a global strategy lead at Protect Group, and he's also a Rezgo expert because he was a co-founder of the company and its previous CEO. So thank you for joining us, Stephen. I will let you take it away here.
Yeah, thanks, Toby. It's nice to be back.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so great to see all the new innovations that are in the platform and all the success that you're having. So and all the success of the operators that are on the platform. So it's nice to kind of come back and see it with new eyes, fresh eyes after
Yeah.
after a while. So I'm very excited and very excited to share some stuff around pricing and specifically dynamic pricing because there's a lot of talk about pricing in the space right now. And dynamic pricing especially is a really hot topic. So let me share my screen. Just give me 1 second while I set that up. Share that. All right. How
Perfect.
do we look? Good?
Yep, that's
All
perfect.
right. Perfect. So I'm going to cover off some pricing strategies today, some both tactics and strategies for pricing, and then some ideas around how to implement some of those pricing strategies using the Rezgo dynamic pricing rules. So let's get started. So what are we going to cover today? I'm going to cover some pricing types. So both cost plus pricing as well as variable and dynamic pricing. I want to explain a little bit about what the differences are between that type of pricing because you're going to hear those terms a lot as you continue to do business, both on this platform as well as just in the industry as in general. So if you read articles on Arrival or or hear about this stuff, you'll have an understanding of what those differences are. We'll talk a little bit about pricing considerations, so things that you'll want to take into account as you price your products. These may be things that you've already considered. These may be new to you. I don't know, but I'm going to share some of those considerations with you so that you've got those. Then we're going to dive into some of the strategies and my 5 favorite strategies. These are like tried and true pricing strategies that work on a variety of different things, not just tours and activities, but these are sort of bread and butter kind of pricing strategies that you'll find in retail in general. And then we'll go through Rezgo dynamic pricing rules and how to apply some of those strategies in the pricing rules. And then we'll go through Q&A and you can ask me some questions and I'll try to answer them if I can. So, all right. So let's start with what is variable and dynamic pricing? So which type works best for your business? There's kind of 3 main pricing types that we look at, especially in tours and activities: cost plus pricing, variable pricing, and dynamic pricing. You've probably heard of all 3. If not, cost plus pricing is really the most basic kind of pricing. So cost plus pricing is really taking your costs, whatever those costs are, and adding a markup to it, and that's your price. And it's generally just a static price for your product across the board, regardless of where you sell it, right? Could be direct on your website, could be through an OTA, could be through a resale partner like a travel agency or a local concierge. But that's really the most basic. It doesn't change. It's the same everywhere. That's it. Variable pricing is generally you set up a price for a particular time period. And so seasonal pricing, for example, could be an example of variable pricing if it's done in a static way. So basically you set up 2 prices, one for, the off season, one for the on season, and that's it. And those are kind of pre-set up at the beginning of the year, and then those get distributed out to your partners, to your OTA partners or reseller partners, and they have like a fixed price sheet that they use throughout the year as they sell your product or as you sell your product. You kind of just use that basic price sheet as a guide for your pricing throughout the year. Dynamic pricing is where you use the system to adjust your pricing based on particular rules that are set in the system that help to adjust that pricing on the fly. So the price that you see when you go through the booking process may vary depending on certain conditions, right? And that's where the dynamic pricing rules really come in, really help with that. The dynamic pricing rules can support variable pricing as well as dynamic pricing. Just depends on how you layer them together and what those conditions are. Generally, variable pricing is one condition. So seasonal pricing. Dynamic pricing is really multiple conditions that layer on top of each other that make that price different in real time to the customer. So it's not a case of, you've probably, you all know the starting from price, right? So that's the starting from price that you put on the product that gets displayed at the product list level. And then once you actually pick a date and the number of guests, et cetera, that price is going to dynamically change based on a number of conditions. So we're going to talk about some of those moving forward. So those are really the three main pricing types. What you want to keep in mind is that as you do variable and dynamic pricing, you want that to be based on your costs. So you want to make sure that you're not undercutting your costs in search of like better dynamic or variable pricing. So let's talk about some of those pricing considerations. Your fixed costs are probably your first major consideration. So those are things that don't change on a tour by tour basis, right? You have vehicles, you have equipment, you have staff, you have marketing costs, you have rent to pay, all of those things, staff, salaries and all that sort of stuff, those are your fixed costs. So when you're thinking about how to price your tour, what you want to take into account is, how often you run the tour, how many seats you have on the tour, what your occupancy for the tour is, so how many people on average you have show up on the tour. Now, if it's a new product and you're not sure about that, you can generally estimate or set a target in terms of what you want your occupancy to be for that tour and use that as a guide to set your pricing. And then once you've got those fixed costs, you want to take into account the variable costs. Those variable costs are things like, food or admission tickets that aren't preset per tour, but they're preset per person per tour. So those are, if you only have 5 people, you only have to buy 5 admission tickets, right? If there's only 5 people, you only have to provide food for 5. So those costs are variable per tour, not per guest, but per tour. And then your operational costs, I already kind of mentioned some of these as fixed costs. For example, marketing and advertising costs, depending on how you want to categorize it. Your administrative costs, customer service, technology, those are all kind of operational costs. So those three things you want to take into account when you actually come up with the pricing for your tour. And then once you've determined what those costs are, then you want to look at, okay, how much money do you actually want to make on this product, on this tour? Now, standard kind of retail markup is 40%. That actually works really well as a minimum margin for tours and activities as well, mainly because you have to take into account your reseller costs. 33% of sales now for tours and activities are done via OTAs. You're looking at an average cost of between 25 and 30% for reseller costs when you're selling through an OTA or through things like cruise lines or other distribution channels. So you need to leave room in your margin for those resellers. If you're doing a 30% reseller cost, for example, then you're leaving enough room for a 10% margin, right? 10% profit margin, which is reasonable. You might want to go higher than that. You might want to say, I want to make 20% on this. Just remember that as you adjust your margin, your pricing will change, right? Once you take those considerations in mind, you'll come up with a price that takes all of that. Now, is it competitive compared to other products in the marketplace? That you'll need to do some competitive analysis and see if that's the case, because you don't want to be too far outside the range of what your competitors are charging when you're in a particular market. But you do want to take into account that, if you're not able to price your product competitively with the cost base that you have, then you need to think about what can you do to either bring your price down so that it's competitive with the market. And that may mean things like adjusting your costs. So that could mean either increasing the number of seats that you have available if you have a large van. For example, increasing the number of seats that you have available to sell on that tour, or adjusting some of your other costs, like maybe not doing some of the variable costs on a per person basis in order to bring those costs down, and providing that perhaps as an add-on at the end, so that you can recoup or do upgrade sales as you go through. So those are some of the important considerations to think about. I also want to just give you some key pricing terms that you should be familiar with now, but if not, these are important things to consider and to remember as you go through and talk to folks in the industry. Your net pricing, obviously, the net pricing is the price at which you sell to your tours to a wholesalers. That's kind of your wholesale rate. Um, your retail rate, also known as your rack rate, you may have heard that term before. That rack rate is what you charge to the general public. That should also be the retail rate that your OTAs and other partners sell your tour at. If they're selling your tour, if you have what's called price parity, and you may or may not have heard that term before, price parity means that your product is available at the same price across all distribution channels, no matter what, right? Now, a great example of a product that has price parity is Lego. Lego, regardless of where you go, is the same price. Lego is really, really strict about their products being sold at the same price everywhere. So that's a really great example in the retail world of price parity. Price parity is really big in the hotel space, especially because they want hotels that sell direct don't want to have to compete with OTAs that are selling their hotel prices at less, and pulling potentially direct traffic away. You want to make sure you're doing the same thing. So if a Viator or Get Your Guide is selling your product for less, you'll want to consider having a rate parity clause in your contract. It's not something that's standard. They don't like rate parity because they want to control pricing so that they can do that. But if you have sway, if you have the ability to do it, you should definitely take a look at considering that. And then the last big one, commission. You hear this all the time. Commission is the amount that you pay to a third party. And generally, it's the difference between retail and net. So if you're selling net rates to a partner, they're going to add their markup. That essentially becomes their commission. If you're selling through an agency where the booking is coming directly to you, you would pay commission back to the agency. That would be their commission is the difference between the retail and the net that you charge. So those pricing terms, important to keep those things in mind. Okay, let's get to the fun stuff. So the fun stuff is 5 pricing strategies. I love these ones. Let's get started. Let's just dive in. First of all of these pricing strategies are based on what's called or referred to as psychological pricing. And the science of psychological pricing is rooted in behavioral economics and cognitive psychology. So I know, got a couple of big terms there, but consumers basically, the concept is that consumers basically perceive value differently based on how prices are presented. So depending on how you present your price, that will actually have an impact on whether a customer is going to buy that product or not, or feel urgency about buying that product. So these are things that have been around for a long time. They're proven by science, believe it or not. There's been studies on the effectiveness of these pricing strategies. So these are things that you can definitely use um, in your own products. So the first one I want to cover is charm pricing. And essentially, charm pricing is what's also referred to as the left digit effect. So you've probably seen this at, at Walmart, at, pretty much any store where all the pricing is like something 99 cents, right? And the idea is that between those two prices, even those two prices on the screen, you're automatically drawn to the left most number, right, after the dollar sign. And when if you don't think about it too hard, when you first look at this price, you perceive the 29.99 to be much less expensive psychologically than the $30 price because of that 1 cent difference. It's only a 1 cent difference, but it actually makes a huge difference in terms of how you perceive that price. And you can change that last digit to 97, 95, 92, whatever the case may be. And when you're talking about larger numbers, it's not just the leftmost digit. If you're comparing two prices, it's always the next left digit. So 29.99, if it's a $2,999 product versus a $3,000 product, right? So it doesn't really matter the scale. It's always that leftmost digit or the leftmost digit that is different that really impacts the psychology of the buyer. So um, just to explain that very briefly, the left digit bias, which is what this is referring to, triggers a perception of affordability and value, driving higher sales. So when you have two products together, one that is a fixed price, say $40, and then you offer one that's like $39.99 or even $35.99 or whatever the case may be, changing that first digit gives the customer the perception that it's a better deal and that it's more affordable. So something to consider when you do your pricing. Are you pricing at $150? Try $149.99, for example. 1 cent difference, but to the consumer, it's that left trigger makes a difference. Okay, that's charm pricing. So very easy concept to understand. The second one is what's referred to as anchor pricing. And anchor pricing is basically showing a higher price and then showing a lower price next to it in order to give you the perception that the lower price is a better deal, even though it may just be the regular deal. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. You can do this using sale pricing, like strike-through pricing, which is very common on sales. So it'd be like, in this case, looking at this example, $199 on sale for $99, even though the regular price is $99. Like if you show $99, there's nothing to compare it to. The brain's always looking for comparisons, right? Like, what is this? How do I know this is a good deal? If you give them that perception that this is a good deal because it's compared to the original retail price of $199, now all of a sudden it's like, wow, that's more than half off. That's a great deal, even though it's literally the same price, right? So anchor pricing is that perception that if you show them a higher price, the next price below it will seem like a good deal. And you don't have to do this with strike-through pricing. This can also be done by sorting your products by most expensive at the top and creating a product, for example, that is much more expensive or that is, the most expensive option, and then showing your other options below it. So that quite often that's a really good example. So what does this do? It's called price anchoring, and it sets a mental reference point for shoppers. So like I said, that baseline. By displaying a higher original price next to a discounted one, you create the perception of savings, making the final price feel like a bargain. So very simply, it's showing a high price and then showing a lower price immediately after it. And like I said, that could be done with strike through, which I'm going to show you how to do in Rezgo, or that can be done by sorting your products in a particular order. Now, when you go to OTAs, for example, OTAs do this all the time. They will show like they're recommended. If you're not defaulting to sort by price, if you're showing their default is that genuinely by generally, sorry, by recommendation or what they're trying to promote, they will quite often use anchor pricing, something high at the top, and then other products that are a little less expensive below, and that's an effective way to drive traffic to those products that are not the highest price products. Most people don't go for the highest price product or the lowest price product. They generally go for something in the middle. So you may have heard the saying, how do you sell a $5,000 watch? This is an old, kind of an old thing with anchor pricing, an old saying with anchor pricing. How do you sell a $5,000 watch? You put it next to a $10,000 watch. That's the way you do it. That is a perfect example of anchor pricing. So think about that one. That's a great little thing to take away with you, is the watch analogy. All right, number three. Number three is what's referred to as FOMO pricing. So this is urgency pricing. And generally, you've probably seen this, like this example on Amazon, where they have like only 2 items left, order it soon or you're going to miss out. This is now in tours and activities, the best way to do this is simply by showing your availability, right? So if your availability is decreased from your standard availability, that's naturally going to show up. It's going to show like 3 seats available or 4 seats available or whatever the case may be. The reason why that's there is to drive urgency. So you don't actually need to do much in order to do this. The system kind of automatically does this for you, which is really great. What you can do is and I'll show you this as well as in the option in the items list, in the option items list, you can add a strike-through price as well as a description for that pricing. And for that pricing, you can add in there, limited time offer or, 25% discount till whenever, in order to kind of add a little bit of that urgency to the item as the customer is going through the checkout flow. So I'll show you that in a minute. But that's FOMO. That's basically you're trying to drive urgency with that pricing. Fear of missing out pricing works on artificially inducing a sense of urgency. So just what we talked about, whether it's a countdown timer, which you've probably seen, limited stock, flash sale, etc. It taps into the idea that the customer might be losing out on a deal. Now, especially if they're looking at a close booking window, for example, and there's limited availability, again, that's going to kind of naturally show up. That urgency is going to be there because if you're showing your availability, because you can choose not to, you can show it or not show it. If you're showing your availability, that's a great way to kind of do it. Now, one thing that you can do if you have a lot of availability, but you want to still drive urgency, turn off availability display for that product, and then just add a description that says, limited seats available, book now, kind of thing. So that is one way to kind of get around that and show that urgency. But in order to do that, you have to do that manually. But if you want to do it automatically, just use the availability as is, and you should be good. Number four is decoy pricing. This is actually one of my favorite, and this one's really effective. You could create products within your mix where you can sell, the base product that is relatively inexpensive. And again, this is good if you want to for cost conscious or if people that are sorting by price, especially when they're looking at products on an OTA. You would use that as kind of not necessarily as a loss leader, but you want to drive them to book with you based on costs if they're a cost conscious consumer. Now, the nice thing is that we know from research, from Arrival research, that although price is important to a certain segment of the booking community or booking public, value is actually of bigger importance. So more authenticity, product that supports local endeavors in the economy, all those sorts of things, right? So there's more than just pricing, but this is a great way to kind of differentiate your product a bit. So you offer, if we look at the two options here with the coffee cups, which is a great sort of basic example, is that you've got the small coffee at $2.99, you've got the big coffee at $7.99. It's like, oh wow, that's a huge price difference between the two, right? And so the customer's like, oh, I want something more than a small, but I don't want a giant coffee at $7.99. But if you introduce a decoy, in this case, a medium price coffee that is $6.99, now all of a sudden the difference between $2.99 and $6.99 and $6.99 and $7.99 says, oh, actually the $7.99 is a way better deal because the $6.99 is like $4 difference between the small and the medium, but only $1 difference between the two. I'll get the large, right? Like, why not? I'll just splurge and pay the extra dollar and get the large. So that's what the decoy is for. The idea is that you're not really going to sell that medium product. What you really want to do is drive them towards the more expensive product. So you create products that guide the consumer towards the product that you actually want to sell. Now, they may still go for the $2.99, and that's okay. That's kind of the base product, and you keep that one really basic. What they're probably never going to buy is that $6.99 cup of coffee, right? Because the medium for $6.99, they're probably gonna go for the $7.99. Unless, of course, they're me and they always just buy the medium without looking at the price, in which case I really should be looking at the price more often, because if I'm buying $6.99 medium coffees when I could be buying a $7.99 large coffee, then that's just on me. So um, but anyway, so the decoy effect, the tactic shifts the focus to the perceived value of the larger option while subtly steering consumers' decisions with an invisible nudge. That nudge being like, hey, it's only $1 difference, right? It's about making one choice feel like the smartest move. So in this case, the smarter move is not the $2.99 to $6.99, but the $6.99 to $7.99. That's the move you want. That's a smaller move for the consumer, right? Going from the $2.99 to $7.99, that's a big jump. That's a $5 difference. But $6.99 to $7.99, it's only $1. So think about how you can price your products in a way that drives the customer towards a higher priced, potentially more, as long as you're doing your costing right and your pricing considerations right, a more profitable product for you. That's the way that you can do that. The last one that I want to talk about here is promo code pricing. And I'm hoping that most of you are already familiar with promo code pricing. If not, this is something that you could do right now in Rezgo and take full advantage of. And promo code pricing basically allows you to basically takes advantage of either existing customer base through newsletters or whatever, or through marketing tactics, so advertising and marketing on Google or through other online sources, and basically allowing consumers to feel like they've got an insider deal or something that's not common to the public. So which then drives a little bit of urgency. So this method provides insider pricing effect. The customer feels like they have access to pricing that is not generally publicly available, which increases urgency. And then they'll come back and join a mailing list or whatever the case may be in order to potentially get that pricing, more of that pricing down the road. Now, it could be something, it's also great for word of mouth. So if there's a customer that's been on your tour before that is unlikely to come back to your tour because they've traveled to that destination, they've done your tour already, they might not do the tour again, they will look at passing that on to someone. So it could be something that's used by someone else as a referral. These types of pricing codes or promo codes are very popular as a referral mechanism. So think about that. Like, how can you use that as a referral marketing? You could do that as a friends and family deal. You could do that as give this to a friend and, first tour is $15 off or whatever the case may be. So you can use it in in that way. So those are my 5 favorite pricing strategies. Next, we're going to jump into the pricing rules in Rezgo and how to set some of these up. So the pricing rules that we're going to set up today are seasonal pricing. I didn't talk, seasonal pricing is kind of like base variable price, right? Seasonal pricing. Now, layer that on top of day of the week pricing. So we're going to set up one of those. Capacity-based pricing, some promo code pricing. Those are all in the rules engine. And then I'm going to show you how to do sale pricing with and anchor pricing using the options and items list. So let me stop sharing for a moment, and I'm just going to share my other screen now. Let me reshare. So I'm going to share. There we go. Okay. How does that look? Are we looking good there?
Yep, that's great.
Okay, perfect. So we're in the rules section of Rezgo now. That's under the inventory tab on the side. So go down to rules, and this is in one of the demo accounts. So the first one I want to show you here is the seasonal pricing. This is kind of one of the most basic pricing rules that you can set up. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that just so I can show you. So first of all, name your rule, something that you can recognize when it's in the list. You can give it a description if you want. Priority is basically how that rule will stack with other rules, right? So if it's just going to stack normally with other rules based on order, then you can just leave it as is. If it's a priority, so you want that rule to take effect first, then you can adjust its priority in the list. Now, these are all the rules are set up. And I remember when this first came out, I was like, this is a great way to do this because it's a very easy way to kind of understand how rules work is if this, then that, right? So if this condition happens, then take this action. That's kind of how the rules work. So when you think about how to create these rules, think about them in terms of like, what is the condition that I want? And what's the end result? What's the action that I want to take effect? So in this case, I've created a rule that says if the booking date is between October 1st and April, so October 1st, 2025 and April 30th, 26. So between October this year and April next year, that's my off season. I'm going to decrease all of my prices by 10%. That's it. I'm going to save that change. Now, the beauty of this is that we're not setting prices. We're not setting individual prices using this price rule. You're setting the price at the option level. So you're setting your base price. This rule is then adjusting that base price on display. So what does that look like when we actually go in and take a look at the front end? Well, if we go into, I think this was on all products, so we should be good here. If we take a look at April 2025, right? I'm not going to use that example because I want to show that later. If we take a look at the morning sale, 229 for adults, right? If I go over to now, let's say October, and I look at the morning sale, that price is now 206.10. So the price has automatically been adjusted in the system for that time period, right? For that October 1st to April time period. So all of your pricing now in that time period is going to be automatically adjusted. Now this one's got a different one now because it's a Saturday, and I'll show you that in a moment. But you can see that the pricing is different and dynamically displayed to the consumer depending on the date that they pick and the product that they've chosen, right? So that's the seasonal pricing. Very, very straightforward. Now we get into the next one that I want to show you is the day of the week pricing. In this case, what I've created is weekend pricing. Now, it's quite common that weekends are more popular than weekdays for tour operations. It's fairly common. So in this case, what I want to do is for those weekend dates, I'm going to charge a little bit more because they are higher demand. They generally sell out. So I'm going to adjust my pricing a bit. Now, you want to be careful with your pricing in that you don't want to make your pricing so different between weekdays and weekends and whatever that your pricing is just completely out of whack, right? Like you don't want to have a price that's $100 on a Wednesday and $200 on a Saturday. That price difference is too great, right? But a $100 difference on a Wednesday and 110 or $115 on a Saturday, that's, a reasonable adjustment for or a reasonable difference for a consumer to kind of understand. So weekend pricing, again, you're going to give it a name. And then for the conditions, you're going to set day of the week being booked. And in this case, I'm going to select Saturday, Sunday, right? Those are the 2 days of the week that I'm going to select. When the booking date is a Saturday or Sunday, I'm going to increase my price points by 5%. So not a huge, 25%, but a nice 5%. That gives you an extra 5% of margin, right, on those weekend sales. So that's what you're looking for is how can you get a little bit of extra revenue on by taking advantage of people's behavior when they're booking with you. So that's an example of the weekend pricing, and that is reflected in the price difference here when I select a Saturday in October versus a Friday in October, which is 216, right? So you can see the pricing is automatically adjusted just by picking that 1 day difference, right? That's an extra $10 in your pocket. So that's what you want to kind of look for is where can you adjust it so it's not a massive difference, but it's enough that it's added revenue for you, and to the customer, it's still good value, right? They want to go on a weekend, they're going to go, they're going to pay a little bit extra. Remember, when these people are going to your destination, they're spending thousands of dollars to get there, sometimes on airfare, hotel, all that sort of stuff. $10 price difference on a ticket is not going to be a deal breaker for them, but it is extra revenue for you, that helps to, make your tours a little more profitable. So that's day of the week rule. The next one that I want to show you is the capacity based. So let's take a high demand upcharge, for example. So this is one that I created, a high demand upcharge. These are really cool. I really love the availability, the rules that are based on availability, because these can drive some interesting behavior, right? So the high demand upcharge, basically what I'm saying here is that if they're booking between 3 days and 7 days out, but your availability is down to like 5 seats, so you're selling out and it's within 3 and 7 days. So you've still got time before the tour and before you want to fill those seats. That time period, again, increase the price by 5%. What that's going to do is between those 3 and 7 days, you can make it longer if you want, right? If you know your average booking window is 14 days, set it at 14 days, right? And so if your window is larger, set it that way. If your availability is dropping down to, less than 10% capacity or 15%, 20%, whatever you want to set, you set that, and your pricing will increase for anybody that's booking within that time period. That gives you a little bit of extra revenue because that's a high demand product. Now, if you want to do the opposite, so you're getting down to the wire, right? Your tour is only a couple days out or even 1 day out, and you've still got seats available, you can create what I've called here a fill my empty seats rule, right? So that's if it's 2 days out or less, right? So right up to the tour, 2 days right up to the tour, and you've got 5 seats still available. So same number as you had before, but now you're getting into crunch time, then decrease my price point by 10% to drive demand for that seat, right? You want to sell it, you want to get it out there, decrease the price by 10%. That's an example of a fill my seats kind of rule. So again, in tandem with a high demand upgrade, you take advantage of when there is a lot of demand for the product. On the flip side, you drive a little bit of urgency if the seats are still available and you've only got like a day left. You could set it so that it's 1 day. You could set it so that it's same day, for example. Within 6 hours of the tour, go for it. Um, So that's the capacity based. Sale pricing, I'll get to that in a second, but the promo code, if you haven't set up a promo code already, very, very simple to do. So I'm a big Star Wars fan, so I've used May 4th as an example because it's coming up. So, May the 4th be with you. So a little Star Wars promo pricing. You just call it what you want. I recommend you add more of a title than just promo pricing because you may end up having multiple um, promo codes within the system. So I'm just going to call this Star Wars Day promo. And you can set your conditions. So the date being booked. So if they book on May 4th, Star Wars Day, and they use the promotional code May the 4th, and there's a maximum of 20 uses for this. So you're not making it available to everybody, right? So all seats, it's just 20. So again, you could drive that in your marketing, on your social marketing, first 20 seats that book for May 4th get $25 off, right? That's a nice promo. And you can use that in Google ads. You could do it on Instagram or whatever. Decrease the price by $25. That's an example of a promo code. Very, very easy to do. So the last one I want to show you is actually not in the rules, but is actually in your inventory, and that's at the options level. So if we take a look at the early morning sale and we look at the price tier, let's jump into, oops, I was actually in there, the option level. If we edit this now and we take a look at the pricing tiers, you can see at the pricing tier, the first pricing tier that I've set here is the adult pricing tier. I've created what's called under the advanced tab here. If you click that open, it'll open up a display of strike through price. In this case, I'm going to add 175 as the strike through price. And I've added a little bit of text here that says limited time 25% off, right? Actually, I'll change that to $25 off because that's actually more accurate. And I'm going to save that. And now if we take a look at the adventure demo on the front end and we take a look at the early morning sale, you can see that text appears, limited time, 25% off. I'll refresh that actually. There we go. Limited time, $25 off. I updated that, right? With the strike through price of 175 and the display price of 150. So there we're using a little bit of FOMO, and we're also using anchor pricing in combination with each other on that. So that's the promo code pricing. So that is an example of how you can use the dynamic pricing rules to create different pricing throughout your year automatically, kind of fire and forget, right? So you don't have to manually update your pricing on an ongoing basis. You can use the price rules to create rules that then adjust your pricing throughout the year automatically. And that's a really nice way to do things because the last thing you want to have to manage is like going in and adjusting individual prices on a day by day basis for all of your stuff. Now, the important thing to remember is that, and let me just switch back to the presentation. The important thing to remember is that your OTA partners are not necessarily going to be able to take your pricing, your dynamic pricing, into account. Most of them are not there yet. Get Your Guide and a couple of others have started supporting dynamic pricing through their APIs, but not all of them do yet. So it's important to keep that in mind. You may still need to do things like static variable pricing with your OTA partners. This is really for your direct pricing. So keep that in mind. Okay. And yeah, so we've got a few minutes left and we can open it up for questions. Man,
We
that went by
do.
fast.
I know, I know. We do have some questions here. I just wanted to touch on, like, it's no secret that you have to get creative with your pricing nowadays, just with operating costs going up so highly. So to have someone just outline what you need to do and just like get all the guesswork out of it is a real treat. So thank you for, demoing all of that and how it applies to Rezgo. Let me just get into our two submitted questions here. We have the first one is, A reseller is selling my tour for less. How do I compete with them on price so customers will book direct?
Yeah, that's again, so that kind of comes back to the price parity or the rate
Mhm.
parity that I talked about earlier. If an OTA is selling, if you don't have a rate parity agreement in place and an OTA is selling your product for less, what you can do, and usually this is done because the OTA isn't charging the same fees and taxes that you may be on your direct product. What you can do is create a promo code on your site that is a book direct special. You could put it into a Google ad in order to show up in Google ads, perhaps ahead of the OTA or near the OTA. It's hard to compete with them on marketing. They just have
Yeah.
so much budget, right? But what you can do is say we will match OTA pricing, use this promo code. And adjust your pricing accordingly when they use that promo code. That also gives you an idea of what's called the billboard effect, right? So quite often, like 30, I think it's over 30% of consumers that go to an OTA, if they know who the operator is, will go direct to the operator to check pricing and to see the product from the operator themselves. So if you use a promo code like that and say, hey, if did you see a price for less somewhere else? Use this promo code and we'll match the price. And you
Mhm.
let them use that promo code, it's a great way to measure that billboard effect, right? Because that customer came from somewhere else, saw your product somewhere else for a lesser price, but still booked with you direct. And that's a great way to measure that. So that would be my recommendation for that.
Okay, cool. No, I like that. And then the final one here, a competitor is selling a very similar tour to mine, but for way less. What can I do to differentiate?
Yeah, so that's a little trickier. What you're going to want to do, and this happens a lot in destinations, especially highly competitive destinations. What you really want to do is, um, if you cannot sell your product for less because your costs just won't allow it, right? Then you need to find ways to differentiate yourself, both in your content and the way that you market your product or the way that you describe your product. Find ways to make your product be different from what the competitor is selling. And by doing so, potentially even just change the offering a little bit and your pricing. You could even increase your pricing. There's no reason why if you're able to differentiate your product enough and make it seem more like a luxury experience or, an experience that is going to be more immersive or sustainable or whatever the case may be, that you can actually price differently from your competitor and still attract the same kind of eyeballs to it. Because remember, again, like millennial Gen Z travelers, for example, looking for authentic products, looking for immersive experiences. They're
Mhm.
not looking for the hop on, hop off tour, right? They're looking for experiences that are once in a lifetime. So if you can differentiate and create that once in a lifetime type product for the customer, pricing becomes less of an issue. And you don't have to compete on price. What you don't want to do is race to the bottom. You want to price your product so that it's sustainable for you as a business, but is great value to the traveler that books with you. And the bottom line is provide an amazing service. Great reviews make a huge difference. And whether
Totally.
that's reviews that are tracked in Rezgo, which are, verified reviews, or through a third-party OTA platform, those reviews are critical and will help drive conversions, right? A cheap product with terrible reviews is not going to sell. A more expensive product with great reviews will sell.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I just as a consumer myself, like that's exactly what I'm spending my money on. So, okay,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, thank you for just taking the time and going through all of this today. It was great. I hope everyone had learned a lot and took away from it. If you have any questions, please let us know at support@rezgo.com and keep an eye on your inbox. You will be getting the recording. So, thank you again, Stephen. It was a pleasure having you back with Rezgo, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you. It was lovely to be here. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.